Hello and good afternoon, good morning. This is Michael Lieberman, food and beverage practice leader at Foe & Son Insurance Brokers. And thank you so much for joining episode 6 of Food for Thought, a monthly web series that we created here to talk about different risk management topics facing food and beverage companies. I am joined here today by some special guests. I have Mr. Greg Wank from Anchin. Greg, thanks so much for joining us. Say hello. Let's do an audio check.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
All right. And also I have one of my close partners in the food and beverage practice at Foe & Son, Mr. Bradley Hamburger. Bradley, thanks so much for joining today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Michael, for inviting me.
All right. So everyone, we are talking about supply chain disruptions. A little bit of a heavy topic, but we're trying to do it in a casual way. I'm really thankful for Greg Wank and his, let's just call it his thought leadership in the food and beverage space, coming today and giving us some of his input on these supply disruptions that we have seen due to COVID-19. Greg and I, we had a discussion last week. We pre-recorded this. Why did we do this? Because when Greg and I get on the phone, we usually talk for a couple hours, right? So we didn't want to bring all of that to you. We recorded our discussion. And then we worked with our creative team. I have Patty Devine here. Patty and her team took all of this content and she distilled it down to about 30 minutes of conversation. Patty, thank you for all the work that you do.
Pleasure working with you, Michael. Thank you.
All right. So please, I want everyone to just kind of sit back, relax. We have a Q&A that's going to follow this discussion. So please stay tuned for a live Q&A. So after the pre-recorded discussion, Greg and I and Brad, we will come back online live to answer your live questions. We are also streaming this conversation on Facebook Live, so we're going to be monitoring that. And Patty Devine will be moderating the Q&A session. I also am very thankful that while we're talking about risk management topics, we are also celebrating food. We're celebrating food and beverage. It's been a real pleasure. Episode 1, we started with Harbor Seafood and their pasteurized crab meat. All the way to our last episode where we spotlighted Italy and their wonderful Italian cuisine. And today we are grateful to put the spotlight on Mark Foods. While they have an array of seafood products available, we're putting a spotlight on their Chilean sea bass. So we're just celebrating food, but also talking about risk management. So for now, I would just ask everyone to sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 6 of Food for Thought. The food and beverage industry, its supply chain or ecosystem was severely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Many companies were faced with unimaginable obstacles that few had ever contemplated. It was truly a black swan event. What have companies learned going through this, and how are companies adapting as they move forward? I'm Michael Lieberman, food and beverage practice leader at Foe & Son, and this is Food for Thought. In keeping with Food for Thought tradition, we surprised our guests with a gift. I'd like to extend my appreciation to the team at Mark Foods for their help in making this episode a bit more special. Mark Foods' premium seafood products are a reflection of their commitment to seeking out and maintaining relationships with the world's best suppliers of sustainable seafood. Mark Foods is the largest U.S. provider of MSC certified Chilean sea bass. To learn more about Mark Foods and their array of products, please visit them at markfoods.com. I would like to thank and introduce our guest for today, Greg Wank. Greg is an accounting and advisory partner at Anchin and a member of the firm's executive committee. He leads the firm's food and beverage industry practice and has devoted his 30-plus year career to helping privately held companies in food and beverage, fashion, manufacturing and distribution, and the greater consumer product space. His clients range from emerging brands to well-established companies, and his capabilities range from strategies for growth to pre-IPO and buy and sell side transaction advisory. Thank you so much, Greg, for joining us here on Food for Thought.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I'm really honored to have you, someone I consider to be a thought leader in the food and beverage space in your own regard, to come on as a guest and kind of share your thoughts on supply chain disruptions, especially in light of what we were still facing this time last year when the U.S. was brought into this COVID-19 global pandemic. and how that impacted food and beverage companies. So let's jump right into this part of the conversation. And I would love your thoughts on just tell me how did the worldwide slowdown that took place really with all products, how did you see this impact the food and beverage industry specifically?
It was just this shock to the system, right? Where the supply chain was disconnected from where the demand suddenly was going to come from, right? So, you had, first of all, issues with just workplace safety and making sure you can have workers to produce products and to move products, right? And receive products, and package products, et cetera, et cetera. So first you had that. So immediately you had just this void, right? You had my clients getting phone calls from their manufacturers saying, look, I know I was supposed to run your product next week, but I don't have any people. They're all in quarantine, or they're, half my people have COVID, or what, God forbid, whatever happens, So there was that. And then there was the immediate kind of consumer behavioral change that happened almost instantaneously, right? Like everybody just suddenly wanted food.
Yeah.
And they wanted food in their house, and they wanted it in a different way than they ever had it before. And a lot of companies weren't prepared for that. So you have my existing supply chain is disrupted, but now I also need to pivot because I need to have a direct to consumer avenue. And I may not have had one before. I may have had a very rudimentary one. We had clients who January of 20, you asked them what their online plan was, and they said, yeah, we'll get to it, and then in April of 20, that's all it was about.
So as companies were dealing with these supply chain issues, there undoubtedly was I guess an inability to deliver, right? So what risks would you say are associated to not being able to get these deliveries to key customers on time?
Yeah, I mean, probably the thing that keeps founders up at night all the time, regardless of pandemic or not, are out of stocks. Particularly as an upstart brand or a younger brand, earlier stage, you've won some shelf space, you've won some distribution. You want to hold on to that as much as close to your heart as possible. And when you get disrupted like that, inevitably there's going to be out of stock. You just can't fulfill. I think, it probably showed the good side of the industry. I think a lot of the big retailers were understanding, obviously. Certainly in the immediate aftermath, late March, early April, gave them some extensions to get back on shelf. A lot of our clients, despite out of stocks, they were able to negotiate with their customers on how to help them in other ways. Maybe, a special kind of product or SKU that didn't exist before, they didn't have before, or giving them something exclusive maybe on a new product launch to try and, keep themselves in good graces with those customers. But certainly, the risks are eventually the customer loses patience. Not just that they're losing patience with you, it's just that they're losing business if they've got empty shelves or empty warehouse shelves for their direct-to-consumer business. It doesn't have to be a store shelf. So that was a huge risk. But again, a lot of our clients who maybe lost some retail space or retail distribution in the aftermath, they more than made up for it online, either direct on their own websites or through Amazon or other channels online, where it actually, numbed the pain quite a bit. You hate to lose the distribution on a major retailer because that's great marketing and PR too, right? To be sold at Target or Walmart or whatever. You'd love for your product to be seen. But I think the volume was more than replaced by the online demand that happened. So even if they did, have to temporarily step a few SKUs out of some of those other retail channels, they made up for that volume online.
So a take home that I'm getting from this conversation with you is, perhaps it's a good idea when companies are negotiating contracts, CPG companies who are dealing with a retailer, for instance, knowing that we have all felt this pain, and we pray that the pain will never come back like it did, but it's always going to be there in the back of our minds that this could happen again. So I guess CPG companies, one thing they can think about is, that recovery plan, and being able to share that recovery plan almost as a competitive asset when they're trying to get make a sale to these retailers, because the retailers are going to want to know, hey, if we're faced with shortages again and we still need that product, what's your plan? How can you help us? So that's a great takeaway, I believe.
That's a great point, actually, and it's something that I'm not sure a lot of founders think about. How many what if scenarios you kind of need to have played out.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot, but what I have found, Greg, is that sometimes when you're in the heat of trying to get a deal done, the focus, and it happens in all aspects of life, but the focus is always on price and price alone. And sometimes if you can bring in these other tools in your tool chest, these other competitive advantages that you may have compared to your competitor when trying to get shelf space, it can come down to being able to communicate a recovery plan. It's something I talk about with my clients. Hey, if we can really get your salespeople within your food and beverage companies to think about food safety and to be able to have that narrative about food safety when they're out selling, just being able to discuss food safety protocols and what the company does in order to produce a safe product. And God forbid if something were to happen where a recall had to happen, how the company is able to facilitate that recall seamlessly, practice recall plans. These are all the things that can become competitive assets. And I don't think a lot of food and beverage companies, or at least their sales teams, ever think about these areas. But again, everyone felt this pain, right? So as a salesperson, if you can speak to the retailer's pain and say, hey, we have put in place some solutions for that, I think it will resonate for sure.
I think that's very valid. It's a great point.
So Greg, the conversation is kind of free flowing here, and we're already talking about some potential take homes, but I'll put you on the spot.
Okay. That's why I'm here.
Do you believe that your clients, have learned lessons? What are the lessons that they have learned that our audience today can hear about from you? What are those lessons that they learned going through this COVID-19 situation? Something that they can apply for the future.
Wow, so many. I'll try to maybe identify three.
Give me three.
Yeah, because otherwise it'll be too long of a list. I think number one, people and team. I mean, it was an unbelievable time, right? I mean, here in my business, right? We're an accounting firm. It's mid-March, the busiest time of year, and all of a sudden the world comes to a stop, right? Including tax season. Not that anybody cared too much about tax season, but then the IRS got rid of April 15th. So we're like, wait a second, what are we going to do? We're going to talk to all of our clients, every single one of them, every week.
Yeah.
See how we can help them, and it was amazing. One, the resiliency. I mean, just phenomenal. I mean, I would get off these phone calls just so impressed with how resilient they were and the lack of panic. There really wasn't panic. It was pragmatic. It was thoughtful. they leaned into their people, their advisors. I think so. People is number one takeaway. How vital your team is to your success. They learned that in spades when this all went down. Number two, their surrounding advisor universe, right? They're not just their accountants, which is important, but all their advisors, including, most importantly, their investors, their boards, their advisors, their formal advisors. We were checking in with so many people in the investment community that are so active in this space, and every one of them were having such incredible dialogue with their portfolio. And it wasn't about, hey, are you protecting my money? Are you protecting my investment? It was, how can I help you? How can we help you? We have our own ecosystem, right, of dozens of portfolio companies, and they all have different advantages and disadvantages. How can we help you like we're helping some of the others? And how can we help you collaborate with other companies and other founders to be smarter and make smarter decisions? So I think that was number two. And number three, like I said earlier, the power of direct to consumer as a portion of your business. Putting on my accountant hat with the numbers, we love the numbers. The margins are usually better. The access directly to your consumer and the data and the information that you get and you learn when you're dealing directly with your customer instead of through middlemen. And realizing that I think this is here to stay. I think they all believe this is here to stay, even when we get, God willing, right? We get to a post-COVID world. And I don't know that it's ever going to go back to what it was. I don't think it will. I think the post-COVID world is going to have a permanently changed world where consumers are going to behave a lot like they're behaving during the pandemic, even though the pandemic lifts. Yes, everybody wants to get back out to eat and go to your restaurants, please, and stay safe. But there's still the way they're going to buy their food and beverage, the amount that they're going to prepare themselves at home, I think is going to be substantially higher than it was pre-COVID. So it must be a vital part of your business as a growing CPG company to have a direct-to-consumer component.
How has this impacted manufacturers versus co-packers versus companies who may be based here in the United States but rely on foreign suppliers to either get them raw materials or to produce a finished good that is then imported into the USA? What have you seen when it comes to this type of situation impacting those different segments of the food and beverage industry?
Yeah, I mean, there's been so much impact across those areas. I mean, the domestic manufacturing we touched on, right, about, their workforce issues that they had, particularly earlier during the pandemic. Great disruption to their business, having to make incredibly tough decisions, putting their worker safety first, and putting in policies. And I'm sure you were very busy with your manufacturing clients around the risks that they're allowed to take and what their coverages are to protect their workers, et cetera. All these new things that they never had to think about before. Some even having to make substantial changes to their manufacturing floor to comply with certain rules and regulations or just to reach their safety standards. So that was all going on. I think as companies adjusted to all that and their workforces came back to close to 100%, it became now incredible increase in demand for manufacturing, particularly if you're in certain product categories that were lending themselves to this high demand that consumers were having during the pandemic. So the demand for your manufacturing time was off the charts. And you had to make difficult decisions. You also had to make decisions about making investment. Do I invest in a pandemic? I can't possibly produce all my orders do I buy them new machines at this time? And what happens if that demand goes away? What if we get to a post-pandemic world and now the demand's gone and I put all this capital into my business? So we had a lot of those conversations with our clients about the risk versus reward of doing and not doing. So that was part of it. I think the foreign aspect, which becomes more and more key, I think we have more and more clients, I don't know about you, probably the same, who are producing overseas, relying more and more on overseas supply chain. Many of them are owned by foreign companies or have partners, investors who are foreign. So there's a lot of entanglements there. The pandemic made it very difficult, very challenging. It extended the time it took to get your goods, period. And it wasn't just that your foreign manufacturer had the same issues, right? I need people, I need ingredients, I need supply. But then also, still today, I mean, you can read in the Wall Street Journal this week about still the global supply chain being much slower, that it now takes 3 months instead of 2 months, to get a ocean freight delivery, or even to have enough ocean freight containers to fill the ships. I mean, it's unbelievable what's going on, right? So our clients are dealing with that too.
So Greg, we talked about some of the price difficulties food and beverage companies are having when it comes to freight expenses. Are you seeing inflation in other areas? And just in closing, answer that question, of course. I'm not going to let you off the hook, but in closing, if you could just send us home with three, actually, one simple takeaway. We'll close out this episode.
If only it was simple. Yeah, I mean, as far as pricing pressure, I think the number one complaint from our clients lately has been around freight, yes, but packaging materials as well, which are related to freight. Just the cost. First of all, the ability to even get enough packaging materials, enough boxes, enough bottles, enough lids, whatever they need, but also the cost of it. The cost of packaging materials going up dramatically, which is very, very difficult to pass along to your customers. So that's definitely impacting margin. That's been a pain point throughout this. We've had several client roundtables during the pandemic where we've gotten 20 to 30 founders or CEOs, COOs, CFOs in a virtual room just to share pain points and success stories and how and help one another. It's been wonderful. And we're just flies on the wall getting to listen to all this firsthand, and it's fantastic. And it's amazing to me always, not amazing because I expect it now, but I just love how generally helpful people are in this industry. It's something I think over the last 10 years I've watched evolve where people are just truly nice generally. Most everybody you deal with in this space, they're just good people who want to just help people. So listening to them try to help each other through these problems, how can I get boxes more cheaply? How can I, a lot of conversation around how do I drive down some of my online fee expenses when I'm doing so much business online. There's a lot of fees, a lot of cost. How do I drive those things down? So I would say the takeaway, again, comes back to communication. I mean, lean into your people, lean in and out to your advisors and your investors and your suppliers and your customers and your competitors. I know we haven't had an in-person trade show in over a year, and that's where a lot of those great founder-to-founder conversations happen. But try to find ways to facilitate that in this vacuum of no trade shows, and hopefully we'll all be back together soon this fall, maybe even hopefully, where we can have some of those great interactions. But I would say that's my key takeaway throughout all this. And I think for the most part, our clients do that real well. And that's why, despite all these just terrible circumstances, some of them have thrived. absolutely thrive throughout this. So that's what I would take away, Michael. But thank you. This has been wonderful.
Well, that's great advice, and thank you for that advice. I know that the viewers are going to find it very helpful. And yes, I miss the trade shows. I know it's almost like a badge of honor, right? You know, you've been in this business for 30 years. I've been in this business for 20 years, and everyone talks about, I've been to 20 consecutive Boston seafood shows. I've been to 10 consecutive, specialty food association shows.
Yeah.
And the list goes on. I miss seeing people face to face, and yes, I do think we're rounding the corner, and we'll be there soon to be able to walk those showroom floors and taste the wonderful products that our clients produce.
I look forward to doing that with you.
So Greg, this Food for Thought series that Foe & Son has produced, we talk about risk management topics. We talk about, let's just call it what it is, somewhat heavy topics. But in the course of doing this, we want to celebrate food. We want to have a little bit of fun. So in the lead up to our discussion today, I posed a question to you. I asked you about your favorite food or your favorite meal. So would you be so kind and share that with the audience?
Well, I think I went down the road of the one time a year I get to choose the restaurant we go to as a family. One of my favorite Italian restaurants, and I always get their Chilean sea bass. The way they prepare it is phenomenal. And I told you that, and then unbelievably, I got a delivery over the weekend of Chilean sea bass.
That is right. I know you told me about going to, and it has to be on your birthday, right? The one time a year you get to select where to go. And you told me about this Italian restaurant. You told me about the Chilean sea bass that you order. And by the way, Chile sea bass is my go-to as well. It's such a phenomenal fish. So when you told me that, I immediately thought of Mark Foods. Mark Foods is the leading U.S. importer of MSC certified Chilean sea bass. I reached out to them. They were gracious in helping me get this gift to you. And I believe that we have some footage of you receiving that delivery and potentially even preparing that. Is that correct?
Oh, preparing it? Not yet.
All right. So I
don't have the recipe yet, but we're going to get there.
Well, let's cut to that footage now, just so we can see you are receiving this product from Mark Foods.
Okay. Chilean sea bass.
What?
What? He asked you what one of my favorite meals was, and I told him when we go to the Italian restaurant and we get Chilean sea bass with the, what's it called? The
Amatriachi or something?
Sauce or whatever it's called. So he sent me Chilean sea bass. Now we have to cook it.
I have to cook it?
Now you have to cook it. 10 servings.
I love Chilean sea bass.
All right.
Thank you. Who is this from?
Cold. It's from Michael Lieberman from Foe & Sons. He's interviewing me next week.
Thank you.
I guess I gotta eat this on camera. Thanks very much.
That's awesome.
So Greg, that was a great little clip, and knowing that you haven't prepared it yet, well, first of all, 5 pounds of Chilean sea bass, that's going to last you a little bit. Any thoughts on how you're going to prepare it?
I think we're gonna saute it up in some tomato-based sauce, and we'll add some garlic and onion and some wonderful things, and it'll be, I can't wait. It's gonna be fantastic.
It doesn't take much to make that fish fantastic. It's very simple. So, well, look, we hope your friends here at Foe & Son, we hope you enjoy that Mark Foods Chilean sea bass. But again, my heartfelt appreciation to you, Greg, for taking the time to join us here on Food for Thought. It's much appreciated. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Wait. Hey guys, let me jump in here. I think I've got something to add. Hello, how you doing? Thanks for the invite, by the way. I continue to look through my emails. I'm not sure I see the Zoom invite, but I'm 100% sure that y'all invited me to this and somehow it must have gone to spam. That's fine if y'all think you're gonna have a merrier time here without me. Either way, diving in here, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Melissa Ficina. I founded City Ops and I'm a general partner at City Capital and happen to have the pleasure, privilege of working with dozens of early stage businesses with these two gentlemen here. Both of you have been instrumental, frankly, in helping both City Ops grow as a business, supporting me really as service partners, the way that you both do to our portfolio businesses, and really as confidants and industry experts in the space. And so, I lean into you both heavily for knowledge, insight, strategy, direction on both where, we personally are headed in the industry. I've transitioned substantially in the last, handful of years from being a small stage, kind of consulting founder to having a tremendous amount of portfolio companies and assets under management within City Capital. And so this is really a means of having fun and saying thank you, bringing forward the personalities that I think you both bring to this industry and space. And as boring, really boring as insurance, accounting, and frankly, operations can be, I think we all have a tremendous amount of fun. And, this was just one of the many ways I think to display that. So thanks for all the efforts, sincerely, both on behalf, of the City family and all the, businesses that we support along the way.
Thanks to all for joining us here on Food for Thought. A huge thank you to my guest, Greg Wank, and thanks to Mark Foods for helping us provide a special gift to our guests today. To all of our viewers, please check out Mark Foods by visiting their website at markfoods.com. To continue the conversation on supply chain disruptions and the new risks faced in the post-COVID world, please reach out to me by phone or email. I look forward to hearing from you. And finally, thank you to all of our FOA and Son valued clients for allowing us to serve your risk management and insurance needs. It's our honor to play a role in your food and beverage journey and your success. I'll see you next time on Food for Thought. Wow, a little surprise there from Melissa Ficina. I mean, Greg, that's a nice thing about not being able to see the finished product. Patty, I take it that Melissa worked with you and the creative team to surprise us with that little message. I think that was the equivalent of a Zoom bomb, right?
I never saw that before. That was phenomenal. Only Melissa could pull that off.
Well, Melissa, you are
I want to give a shout out to Edward Givens Brown, who made that all happen on my team. I didn't do that. I can't take credit for it. But, want to Zoom bomb anybody.
Well, Edward, thank you for the creativity and making that appear like a Zoom bomb. And Melissa, if you're watching, and I'm sure you will, if not live, you'll watch the recording. Thank you so much for taking the time and sending us that message. Really appreciate that. Greg, I know that you were probably touched by that as well, right?
Very much so. Melissa's a dear friend, and you couldn't be bombed by a better person than Melissa. So
that's right. All right, so we're here in the live Q&A. I really wanted to have Brad Hamburger join. Brad, within the FOA and Son food and beverage family, he's been focusing a lot on let's call it specialty food products, a lot of CPG, brands out there. You walk the fancy food show. Those are the types of clients that Brad is working with. And Brad, going through this past year with you and just working with your clients and some of the issues that they faced, you have so many stories about supply chain issues and disruptions. And I'm very thankful to have you on. If you could just share a story, just to get the conversation flowing a little bit, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. And before I share my story, I just want to say I appreciate Greg and that conversation that you had with him, especially Greg and his team, because they are really what I would call non-traditional or unique in their approach, working with owners and founders of CPG brands. And what they do is a great example for us and our clients. And I was really touched by Greg's story of how the minute COVID hit, his mission with his entire team was to call every single client and then to call every single advisor and start the wheels of communication rolling so that we can all work together to collaborate and respond to the crisis. So I love that. That was awesome. One quick story that I have is one of our mutual client brands that our team and the Anchin team work on is a manufacturer of plant-based yogurts and desserts, and they manufacture them over in the EU. And so they've had some supply chain challenges. And one thing that happened with the recent supply chain challenge is they had a delay of a major shipment that was coming here to be handled by a local national distributor. And that delay, because it's a refrigerated product, caused a crunch on their sell by or use by dates. And so by the time that load got off the ship and was on its way to the distributor, it was rejected because the distributor said, we can't take in this product and be sure that it's going to get to the retailer in time, or in the hands if it was direct to consumer, as Greg talked about. So this is a big issue for a lot of brands, and we know that in the news now, there's the Suez Canal blockage. And so, I think that's a really good topic for Michael and Greg, for you both to talk about with those challenges, because some of those are not met by insurance, as an example. And what do founders do when they're faced with these types of issues?
I mean, Brad, it's a great story, and you bring up a good point related to insurance, and I'll let Greg jump in here too, from his perspective. But this is the type of situation that founders need to contemplate. Greg, during our conversation, you talked about the what ifs. There's so many what ifs. And I know our work as insurance brokers, or really risk advisors, is to work with our clients to talk about those what ifs. And then for our clients to understand what insurance can do and what insurance can't do. I mean, I talked about this on the last episode of Food for Thought with Michael Erd, where delay is an absolute issue. Delay leading to physical damage of food products, or delay leading to a loss of market, where in this situation, Brad, with your story, it's almost like you have this loss of market ability because of that shelf life issue. The product may be fine, it's not damaged, but you have this loss of time to sell it. And these are the cases that could possibly be insured. It takes some unique manuscript wording, but it also takes a very large insurance premium budget, right? So depending on where you are in the chain, if you're a small startup, you may not have the available premium funds to procure this type of coverage. But it's still good to know about these risks and to know what insurance can do or can't do. And if you can't get the insurance, what's our backup plan, right? In this situation, if we know that a distributor is not going to take that product, what is a secondary salvage market? So we just don't sit on our hands and do nothing. Maybe there's another way to distribute that product. Maybe we call it what it is, a fire sale, right? You sell it for a discount to be used quickly. So yeah, we spent a lot of time on this. Greg, any thoughts on the issue of delay and how it impacts clients?
Yeah, really interesting stuff. I think, it goes to what we talk to our clients about, like when we look at projections with them, let's say, and they're projecting growth coming from certain areas of the business, or new SKUs or new distribution. We bring up to them about, timeline and building in enough lag that they can fill the orders, right? And then you got to deal with shelf life. Obviously, if it's a fresh product, that's a big deal. So for a client like Brad's talking about, we talk to them about maybe leading with their longer shelf life products with new launches rather than the very time sensitive product line, right? So there's things you could do yourself as a business owner to mitigate some of those risks as well, particularly when you have a very long supply chain. So there's just a lot of different ways to think about these things.
Another thing, Greg, along the lines of what you're saying is, for the founders, they can think about, does it make sense long-term to rely on the supply chain? And is there a local option? Can they switch to a co-packer in the United States rather than making the product in the EU and having that fragile supply chain link broken by delay or things that, it's not practical to buy insurance for?
Right.
Exactly.
It's such as a container ship blocking the Suez Canal.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Will my insurance cover that?
Which is
crazy.
Fascinating situation. I mean, look, all the facts are still kind of, coming at us. But I heard it was a 30-mile-per-hour gust of wind that caused that vessel to go off course and become wedged. It's surprising that a 30-mile-per-hour wind would cause such an issue to a container ship of that size. But I'm sure there's still more to learn about this scenario. But Brad, thanks for sharing that. Patty, do we have any other questions that came in? I know you're moderating Facebook Live and all the other avenues that are out there that people can pose questions.
Sure. So you may have touched on this, but while you were speaking, Andrew Ward asked about how all the changes and demands play a role in food safety, and just tying it back to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in and food safety, we don't know all of the facts yet. I mean, I don't think there's any statistical evidence that there are more food recalls because of the pandemic. But we also have to understand the food and beverage ecosystem, right? I am taking this word, this concept of ecosystem from my good friend, John Kehoe, who joined me on episode 4 of Food for Thought. And if you think about the food and beverage ecosystem, you have your suppliers, you have your transportation companies, you have your warehouses, you have your food safety programs. And, Greg, during our conversation, you talked about, that demand for manufacturing severely increasing. And when there was no more room for manufacturing with a certain supplier, owners of goods maybe had to shift to a tier 2 or tier 3 manufacturer. And maybe during that process, there was not as much attention paid to food safety, right? So there was a breakdown in that ecosystem. We couldn't travel, right? So you may have owner of brands who would go and travel to a co-packer or a manufacturer to take a firsthand look at their food safety protocols. They couldn't do that anymore. And you also have to remember the food and beverage ecosystem includes government, right? We know that the government, the FDA, for instance, was not doing as many inspections. They weren't doing as many foreign facility inspections. They weren't doing as many domestic facility inspections. So there was something broken in that ecosystem. So was something lost from a food safety perspective? I have to believe so. We may not see the statistical evidence in recalls, but I have to believe something was lost. Not just from a pathogen standpoint, the introduction of pathogens, but also from a food, let's call it an economic adulteration standpoint. People substituting subpar ingredients or substituting different species or different, let's say a cumin, as a spice like cumin substituted as a peanut protein. These things are probably taking place. But yeah, I think something was lost when it came to food safety for sure.
I think, Michael, another factor to add to that equation is, while COVID was raging in the population for a lot of reasons, practical reasons, people didn't see physicians. They weren't going to doctors unless they had an emergency. And pathogens that may have led to gastro emergencies may not have been reported because people didn't seek medical attention immediately or even at all. And they may have dealt with those issues at home rather than through a provider. So some of the things that we may have discovered in a non-COVID environment may not have been discovered over the last 12 months.
Good point. Good point.
Right. I agree with everything you guys just said. I mean, there was a lawnmower going by when I'm 5 for some reason. Sorry about that. I was just going to add about, like you mentioned the number of inspections. I mean, clearly our clients experience much fewer live inspections. We dealt with it, servicing our clients ourselves. so often would go to our client's place of business to provide a lot of our services. It didn't happen, obviously, last spring and summer. So just, thinking about putting that in perspective, there was just so much less physical monitoring of so many different parts of business just because of COVID, that it's inevitable, I think, that occurred.
Patty?
Yep, ready for your next question. So Justin Foa sent this in. He's interested in what food sectors saw the greatest increase during the pandemic, and will that momentum be sustained?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's amazing what has happened with frozen foods. I have actually, I'm going to do frozen foods as a broad category. I read something that in 2020, frozen foods were up 20% year over year. I mean, that's an incredible surge. Yeah, a large portion of the population who never would buy frozen, they've now transitioned to frozen. But a subset of that, and this kind of goes with the theme of the Mark Foods Chilean sea bass shipment to Greg, is that seafood sales was the leading category in increased sales year over year. I think seafood sales were up 30%. And I have to imagine that comes down to a few things. Seafood was one of those items that most people would eat outside of the home, right? It was kind of like that special occasion. Let's go to a restaurant and have a nice piece of fish or crab or lobster. And now people had a transition. There was also a shortage of proteins, right? There was issues with poultry producers and beef producers. So people were just looking for proteins, and they saw the seafood sitting there in the frozen aisle and they grabbed some frozen seafood. But at 28, 29, 30% surge in seafood sales is remarkable. Do I think that momentum is going to be sustained? I absolutely do. I think people are looking for healthier food options, healthier protein options, and seafood is definitely a good match for that. Brad, Greg?
Yeah, I was going to add, the better for you anything. So many of our clients, their product offerings are healthier, better than the typical frozen foods that we might have grown up on a long time ago. And those clients, their growth was well beyond the 20% people. I mean, they beat the category handily. If their offerings are healthier, certainly proteins for sure, plant-based was incredibly strong demand. I would say most of our clients that service, foods that you can consume at home as a meal, they blew away their projections for 2020. Just blew them away.
Brad, any?
I would just say that following up on what Greg said, just to add on a little bit, that was a trend that we saw pre-COVID in going to the trade shows, that we saw the better for you categories in every subset of the food and beverage sector was rising. And I think that just escalated. It was, accelerated by COVID. And I think that people who were at home and were more amenable, rather than relying on store samples and other channels that push sales, they were searching on their own on the internet and other ways, and they found these products and they tried them, and they tried them at their leisure, not, and I think it was really good for a lot of those brands.
Great, Patty. Any other questions?
Yeah, so there's two questions around e-commerce. One's a broader one. Someone is just looking for sort of advice on getting into e-commerce, especially when you're talking about frozen foods and how that Chilean sea bass arrived at Greg's house, consumer ready. So that, and then more specifically, can you use R&D tax credits toward entering the e-commerce space? And those are our last two questions.
Well, that last question is definitely
good question.
That's not
That's
an
a good question.
That's all for you, Greg.
Tee that up for Greg.
That's a nice. Who asked that question? Someone from Anchin? Wait a second.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Why don't we start with that? Greg?
Well, so starting with R&D credits, look, anything that you're going to attempt to undertake where you don't know the outcome, you don't know that it's going to be successful, where there's risk of failure, where you just don't know exactly how it's going to end up looking, generally are good qualified research expenditures. So, we start there and then we go deeper. We happen to have a whole team at Anchin that only helps our clients and other companies access the R&D credit. So we can certainly take a look at that for anybody who's interested in exploring that for sure. The point about how to get even introduced direct to consumer, it's a great point about frozen, right? It's a great point. We've learned so many lessons through our clients, hearing these stories, clients who can't ship their product during hot weather months because it'll melt, or it's clients that, need to ship things on dry ice or, and things like this. And it's very expensive, right? So typically what they do is they launch a very large package, right? You can't just buy one item, right? You got to buy something large enough to make it worthwhile for us to pack a giant cooler with at least 5 pounds of fish, right? Or even more. So yeah, I mean, that's part of the obstacle is if your product happens to be very temperature sensitive or very heavy, then your direct to consumer model is going to be less profitable because of the freight and handling that goes into that. So you need to solve around that, right? You need to solve around, how do I get enough quantity to the customer to make it still worth my while? And how much of the shipping cost is my customer willing to help bear, right? So we saw a lot of companies, a few years ago, try to charge all the freight, and they saw that customers, who maybe weren't so interested in doing that, paying that kind of shipping cost. So then it evolved to, we'll pay all the freight, and just so we can get product out. And that proved to be an incredible financial burden, because now you're losing money almost on every shipment. So now we're seeing something in the middle. We're seeing a lot of our clients kind of share the freight, or encourage much larger quantities where they'll absorb more of the freight because there's enough in the package to make the margins strong enough to absorb the freight costs.
Brad, any insight on advice for getting into e-commerce?
Yeah, I think that there's going to be a lot of post-pandemic challenges as we emerge, into this kind of hybrid situation where I agree completely, first of all, with Greg that a lot of the changes that we saw in the pandemic are going to be somewhat permanent in the way that our brands and the founders that run them are going to do business. And it's really an open question, I think, for those founders as to, how quick are we going to return to the old sales channels that used store sampling, trade shows, and those models? How quick are we going to get back to that? And then in terms of the COVID trends, how durable are they going to be? Like trends like Gold Belly, where consumers would pay more than the actual cost of the good to get it transported to their home. And so will that go back to the old model where folks, don't want to pay for those costs and they are going to hop in their cars and go to the stores? We'll see. But I think that, communication, as Greg talked about, is going to be key, and being resilient and nimble for the founders and how they deal with how we move into this post-pandemic environment is going to be very interesting at a minimum.
Yeah, for sure. And Greg, something that you and I talked about during our discussion was, and I don't think it made the final cut. It was part of our 2-hour discussion that didn't make the final cut, but we talked about, companies really being almost fearful of making investments into these different types of supply chains, right? Like the e-commerce, it's, do we make that investment into doing this? Because, maybe consumers do revert back to the old ways of just going to the grocery store and picking up their food, and all that money that you put into it. So yeah, that's a good point, Brad. But I would say if you're looking at the e-commerce, the other thing you got to be mindful of is that you have to factor in a pretty good cushion for customer complaints, customer returns. There's a big issue with, porch pirates, right? People taking packages off, away from front doors. Who's going to bear that risk? When you have a customer coming back to you saying, I never got my package, how are you going to make that customer happy? The other advice that I would give is if you're going to go e-commerce, you better make sure that you have a pretty good online presence, right? I think companies are already, waking up to this. They know that they need to have a good presence on social media outlets. People are going to, if they have a complaint, they're going to go to social media. If they love your product, they're going to go to social media. You need to be actively monitoring Facebook, Twitter, what have you, for customers going there with, celebrating your product and also maybe, complaining about your product, and be able to respond to those complaints in a timely manner. So that would be my advice. There's a lot involved for sure. Patty, anything else? We're nearing the hour mark.
We are done. Thank you.
All right. All right. So look, Greg, Brad, thank you guys so much. Patty, thank you for everything. You and Ed are always, just fantastic producing this Food for Thought series. And thank you to everyone for joining today. And thank you to everyone who's going to look at the recorded version of this. But please stay tuned for further updates on episode 7 of Food for Thought, which will be launching next month. And for now, just signing off. Thanks all. Everyone take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do